Welcome everyone. My name is Nick Fransen. I'm your host here for the Autism Online Summit, and we have a real special treat. We have Dr. John Brimhall with us, a longtime chiropractor, has been and seen almost everything out there. Welcome, Dr. Brimhall.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Brimhall, I wanted to start out this interview today and just ask you a little bit about how you got involved in chiropractic. First of all, there's other things I want to touch about your career. But tell me just basically how you got involved.
That's probably a really good question. I was studying to be a dentist. My father was a contractor, and he said, boy, I'm going to work you so hard, you're going to be a doctor. And he started out about 4 years old doing that. He put me out in the hot sun in Phoenix at 122 degrees digging footings. And I said, what's a doctor? He says, you're going to figure it out. So I was actually in my pre-professional work studying to be a dentist. And I'd been over in the desert in Phoenix about 2 years after a car wreck, and I never stood back up. I literally went paralyzed from the waist down and spasm from the waist up. So in those days, you're talking about the 60s, they wanted to do exploratory surgery to see if they could help me. And I didn't want to do that, what little bit I knew at age 20. But my cousin carried me into a chiropractor. He told me what had happened in this accident I'd had 2 years previous, and that things had been out of alignment, kind of like a car gets out of alignment. The tires were wearing funny, and finally I pinched a nerve. So he gave me my first adjustment, and the feeling came back in my legs, and the pain left from the waist up, and boy, the rest is history, because he worked on my mind as well as my body for the next 90 days to get me stable from that accident I'd had. And he said, you're going to be a chiropractor. I said, no, I'm going to be a dentist. He said, no, you're not. He said, we have lots of good dentists, but you owe it to chiropractic and to humanity to do for others what chiropractic did for you. Well, a few months later, I applied to Palmer Chiropractic College. They said, hey, you have good grades, come on down. So I went down and did my 4 years down there, and that started my career.
That's a great story. I've never heard that before. You know, I can't imagine what exploratory surgery looked like, you know, that long ago as opposed to what it even looks like today. So that's a great story. The other thing that's really interesting with you is you're known as the father of wellness in chiropractic, and I think you were really one of the first chiropractors that began the movement of not just the traditional, let's manipulate the spine, let's readjust everything, but bringing whole balanced nutrition, certain supplementation into chiropractic in the whole field in general, which now in some cases is becoming quite popular. Tell us what made that transition.
It's really interesting. When I graduated from college, it was 1971, so I went into practice knowing about the spine. I knew a little bit about craniosacral mechanism because my first son was born with forceps, and we had our son just right after we graduated from college, getting ready to come back to Arizona from Palmer College in Davenport, Iowa, and they used forceps because we're at the university hospital just to practice. And they threw him into seizures, and right there on the spot with me begging them, please don't use forceps on him, and they said, oh, you chiropractors, you think there's a problem. There's not if we do it right. And boom, boy, they squeezed, and he went into real severe distress, took him away from us for 2 days, trying to keep him alive. Well, right after we got out of the hospital, I had heard about craniosacral. I studied upper cervical. That's one of the things I studied in college, but I didn't know much about cranial. So I went to a doctor who did cranial, and I literally dedicated the next 18 years of my practice learning craniosacral to become really profound at it, because the doctor we took him to got him out of the seizures, and I continued that process, so he hasn't had seizures since the first few months of his life. It did affect him, though. He's kind of retarded. He became a surgeon instead of a chiropractor, so that's a pretty good story, too. My kids had child abuse like I did. I had them work in the office like my dad had me work in the field, and all three of my older sons have become physicians. My oldest son is an orthopedic surgeon in northern Arizona. My second son is a chiropractor in southern Arizona, and I have a son who's a dentist in Alaska. And one of the wives has her doctorate in physical therapy and actually worked for Mayo's, and we exchanged a lot of patients back and forth when she worked at Mayo's, probably over 100, and I learned a lot from that. But what really got me into the wide spectrum was I did applied kinesiology going through school, and Dr. Goodhart was a genius. And he took from the book called The Chiropractic Adjuster by D.D. Palmer, the original chiropractor who gave the first adjustment and helped a guy over hearing problems after he was deaf. And one adjustment, his hearing came back, which is kind of hard to explain neurologically, but it definitely is explainable. But Dee wrote in his book that the body caused or had subluxations caused, which means vertebrae get out of place or stuck in place and cause neurological involvement, lymphatic drainage problems, acupuncture problems, etc. And Dr. Goodhart took that there could be structural problems, nutritional problems, or emotional problems that all cause the vertebral subluxation. Well, the longer I was in practice, I learned that was exactly right, but there was also electromagnetic pollution problems with all the computers we have and power lines and Game Boys that people play. I found out that there was allergies and sensitivities in almost every one of us, and I found out there was a lot of toxic accumulation and poisons. So we developed what we call the 6 interferences. In fact, I wrote a book that I'm most noted for. I have several that I have written, being a best-selling author, but the one that gives me the most pleasure was called Solving the Health Puzzle with the 6 Steps to Wellness. And in fact, that's available online. We sold all the books out, and I changed the nutritional company I was working for, so it's not up to date. But that is available through my office if you want to get it online. And normally it's $30, but heck, we do a $5 special for your people if you want to do something like that. And they can call the office, and I'm sure you'll make that available to people and get that called Solving the Health Puzzle with the 6 Steps to Wellness.
Sure. Now, Doc, before you go on, let me ask you just a couple things before we go into your 6 steps, because that's some really interesting stuff that you have. Craniosacral, so we're of course talking about autism. Craniosacral and autism, do you notice any differences in these sort of children while doing craniosacral?
Absolutely. Not only children, but unfortunately adults. I've treated people almost every age and stage of this. But I will say one thing. I have never been asked to treat an autistic person at any age where the parents did not tell me it was within 24 hours after inoculation that they saw the downturn. I know there's a lot of controversy on that, but there certainly isn't in my mind in practice. And I've been doing this now for 44 years, if your math plays out really quickly. And so I've seen about everything there is to see, I think, but leprosy. And I have found in autistic children, craniosacral is phenomenally important because the brain controls all aspects of life. It uses the most glucose, the most oxygen on a day-to-day basis. And if for any reason you don't have the cerebral spinal fluid flowing properly, then you have dysfunction. And as a chiropractor, I'm also an acupuncturist, as you are. I'm a nutritionist. I formulate over 200 nutritional products to accomplish what I needed to help people, whether it was a heart dysfunction or a circulatory dysfunction, a gut dysfunction. And of course, we know the gut is 80 to 90% of the immune system, so we'll go into that a little bit later too. But yes, craniosacral is phenomenally important. And we not only use hands-on, but we use the treatment called percussion. Robert Fulford was a DO, doctor of osteopathy, and he was not able to go into the war, so he stayed out trying to get people well during the war. And so he developed an instrument called the percussion instrument, and you would kind of visualize it as a light jackhammer. It's tapping on the tissues, and normally you'll find a hard area. Let's say that you had a liver that's toxic, which is very common today, and so you would go on the right rib cage, and you would percuss the right rib cage, but you would hold the other rib cage on the opposite side. Or if I was working on a knee, I'd percuss the first part of the fibula, called the proximal fibula head, while I hold the opposite side of the leg. And it winds the fascia up so tight that it finally releases all the energy sinks or energy cysts that were there. So that type of craniosacral is phenomenal for learning disability, autistic children, brain injured people of all ages and stages. Yes, very important.
Now, do you still practice, or I think you're kind of out as far as daily practice now? Is that correct?
It's kind of a long story, but the epic was that I was so far behind. I was booked 3 to 4 months in advance, and I could not get caught up no matter how hard I tried. And so we had people waiting 3 to 4 months to get in to see me. And I was training doctors on the weekends to do it. And finally my son came into practice. He took over the active practice there in Gilbert, Arizona. And I went into full-time teaching. So I travel all over the country, do webinars, things like this, to teach other physicians how to help people at a greater level. One thing that I learned in this work, and I taught my sons, and that is, if you don't mind losing, you'll lose. In other words, there's no such thing as a good loser in my mind. It doesn't mean you can't be a good sport, but I don't like losing. And so when I see somebody, I really want them to get better. And I learned, let me give you a real quick scenario here. We'll probably cut to a lot of information. I was in practice only a few months, and they referred a person to me that had had migraines for 14 years. They have actually done a vagotomy, which they cut the vagus nerve, and they'd already done a hysterectomy, thinking that might have been the cause of the migraines. It was not. They got no improvement. They came into me, and their spine was a mess. And so I adjusted them, and on the very first adjustment, the migraines went away for the first time in 14 years. And they never came back, which was like a miracle. So God was very kind to me that day. And so naturally, people that have problems know other people that have the same problem, so they send another person into me that had migraines, and I look at their spine and say, well, this is easy compared to the other one. But as I began to make spinal correction, I didn't get the kind of cessation of the migraines as fast as I thought I should. So Goodhart talked about structural problems, nutritional problems, and emotional problems. Hey, I'm a male at 24. What do I know about emotional problems? But nutrition, I could look it up in a book, and I gave a nutrition that was supposed to be good for migraines, and bam, after I gave them the structural correction and the nutrition, their migraines went away. Well, as the universe will have it, they don't want you to get too cocky, so they referred another person into me that also had migraines, and this person did not respond. And that was really strange. In the early days in the 70s, if somebody didn't get better doing what I was doing, I was just shocked. What are you talking about? Everybody gets better in here. And it really was that way. I was just so blessed. And we got people out of wheelchairs. We got people out of migraines, as I mentioned, people out of seizures. It just because we treated the function, now we use nutrition. But now this person wasn't budging. Goodhart said something to me that really rang a bell with this person in front of me. He said, if you have somebody with a problem that's not resolved, ask them what was going on in their life at the time this happened. So I told her, I said, you have mentioned to me that you did not have migraines until you were about 15 years old. Can you tell me what happened, or go back in your mind, what happened about at age 15 that might have been a trigger? She started sobbing and sobbing. You know, again, I'm a male at 24, 25 here, and we're not used to this kind of stuff, you know, back in the 70s. Now we're really into emotions, but all I know to do, when he told me that they would have an emotional problem and they could manifest it, a strong muscle would then go weak. So I checked her, and every muscle in her body went weak. And she said, what you do is you treat, they're like acupuncture points or even vascular centers right here on the forehead. You would have them touch that point until you felt a vascular pulsing in there, and then the muscles would reset, and usually the problem would get better. And boy, that's what happened to her. I had her touch here, and while she was thinking about what happened, her muscles went strong, and she quit crying. I said, wow, let's check you again. You're strong. Think about it again. She went weak again, cried a little bit, but not as much. We had to do this about a half a dozen times on her where she could think about what happened, and then she did not go weak at all, and the migraine was completely gone. I said, would you mind sharing me what happened at 15? She said, I was molested by a family member, and so were my sisters, and so were my girl cousins, and we all have migraines. So as you can see, I expanded my practice that day, to say the least, but she got over that. So I realized, gosh, I guess I better check everybody for structural problems. That's what gave me my miracle. I better check everybody for nutritional considerations, and I better see if there's some emotional locks, fixations, programming that is causing the problem. And then I found out I need to check for allergies and sensitivities, toxic accumulation in the body, and electromagnetic pollution. So that became the 6 steps.
So you can see actually when many of these patients with autism that they can have all of those things that you just named. They could have toxicity issues, they could have emotional issues, they could have structural problems. I know there are many kids still born with forceps, and some parents that contributed. We know the vaccines are clearly are a contributing factor. So let's talk about autism and some of the possible causes. So I know that you mentioned vaccines a little earlier. What other things are you seeing going on with these children that are a problem?
Let me elaborate just a teeny bit on the vaccine, because the vaccine and electromagnetics go very closely together. I became very much involved in electrodiagnosis by Vol. Vol developed a machine where he could measure the meridians of the body. And on the hand, we know that we have the lung meridian and the large intestine meridian, the heart meridian, the small intestine meridian, circulation, sex meridian. So these meridians are pathways that travel through the body. And if our listeners could just think about highways going through the city, what if you only had one highway? You couldn't get very far. Yet if you have all of these meridians, and most of them are paired except for 2, so you have them on both sides of the body, one up the back and one down the middle, if any one of these meridians get disturbed, and trust me, inoculations disturb them. Surgery disturbs them. Emotions can disturb them. And according to the current literature, the acupuncture meridians tie into the fascial planes like we just talked about a minute ago. We use for percussion and craniosacral. So those of you who don't know what fascia is, if you've ever butchered an animal or seen an animal that's been in an accident or something, you know it's this white, real strong fibrous tissue that surrounds every organ and system of the body. In the brain, they call it the dura mater. In the heart, around the heart, they call it the pericardium. In the lungs, they call it the pleura. The bottom of the feet, they call it the plantar fascia. So you can see it's like a wedding ring. It goes continuous. It never stops. So for any reason you have restriction in that fascia, be it a craniosacral problem, a C-section, a traumatic injury, an accident, or you've had an inoculation that affects those energy flows, you have dis-ease. And I do hyphenate that because in chiropractic philosophy, homeopathic philosophy, we don't like to talk about disease. We like to talk about dysfunction. How do we improve the function? So I have never seen an autistic person that did not have all 6 interferences. So when we check them, the first thing from my chiropractic training is I check the spine and the cranium. And then I go right to a nutritional scan. And we do reflex testing. Some of you may be familiar with that. We also do blood studies. We do hair analysis. We do challenge urine tests to determine what heavy metals might be in there, what dysfunction might be in the organ systems. In other words, when you do a blood study, we do a 52 analyte study. So we check to see how liver function is, kidney function is, balanced adrenals, and you can tell if there's allergies by eosinophil, et cetera, et cetera. So we print out about a 12-page report of everything that we see in the blood, and if we compare it to hair, because lead, mercury, arsenic causes incredible dysfunction at every level. So you can see this starts to become a complicated issue, and that's why we wrote the book Solving the Health Puzzle, because each piece is a part of that puzzle with the 6 steps to wellness. And we really found that everybody had all 6 steps. I mean, if you and I were really checked thoroughly, there's no way we don't have an acupunctional balance today. There's no way we haven't picked up some air, food, water contamination from environmental sources. There's no way we don't have some emotional stress, being born to stress. And if there's been a C-section, you say, well, my children couldn't have a cranial problem because they were born with C-section. Well, they really have a cranial problem because the head is designed to collapse and then open back up to kickstart the cerebrospinal fluid. It's also designed to come through the vaginal area to get the mother's probiotics, the proper bacteria that belong in the body there. So if they didn't get it that way, they were just taken out into the air. Whatever in that hospital, the baby picks up on their skin and their mouth, they're breathing in their lungs, and they have dysfunction all the rest of their life. And so we work, and there's a brand new thing out called airobiotics. So later we can talk about that at another time. We won't have time today. But not only do we give people probiotics, we give everybody probiotics. And then also now you can actually put a mister in your home, and this goes out in the air every couple of hours and saturates the skin in the area. It's a natural disinfectant, but also reestablishes proper flora on the body. So I'll take a breath there and see what other specific question you might have.
Yeah, that last one part is a little interesting, so maybe we'll come back to that. We talked a little bit about toxins. We understand vaccines are definitely a factor, and some of the heavy metals as well. What about allergies? So, gluten, dairy, anything else? Why are these sort of foods causing these sort of problems?
Well, let's go to peanut allergy first, because you fly on an airplane now, they won't even give you a peanut if somebody's on there that's sensitive. And why is there so many sensitivities? Here's another issue. When they develop the vaccines to start with, like even penicillin, if you put penicillin into the body, you inject it in, it only lasts for a few minutes. But if they mix it with an oil, the oil allows that to stay in the system much longer. And guess what oil they used and still use is peanut oil. So the sensitivities to peanuts is not coming because peanuts all of a sudden got bad, although they can have aflatoxin in them, they can have other toxics from sprays and all this kind of stuff. But peanut oil itself has been used as part of the inoculation. And you can't put anything into the body by injection or even on the skin or by breathing or eating and not cause the body to act to it. And unfortunately, there's so many toxins in the air, food, and water, as we mentioned a minute ago, that we're setting up autoimmune reactions in the body. And autistic people have horrible problems with this because one dysfunction leads to another. And so many times they treat them with different kind of medications that the body reacts to. And now we have all the genetic SNP testing, single nucleotide polymorphism, where we can see somebody's genetic weaknesses, and we find out that we're propagating those generation after generation, where even if we gave you penicillin, if you gave me penicillin, I have a genetic SNP to it, it may make me worse instead of better. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. Now let me pull out here a bottle. As I mentioned, I have formula over 200 nutritional formulas. I now work with a company called OHF, Optimal Health Systems. And this particular company I formulate for, and Doug Grant, the owner of that, also was a major formulator. He actually got me started many years ago in formulation. But we make, when we evaluate a patient, let's say, how would I evaluate somebody that came in? I would do muscle testing, as I mentioned. The muscles should stay strong if something's good for you. If you put something that's bad for you next to the body, it literally will make a muscle go weak. So we test different reflexes in the body. In other words, if the parotid gland, where you get mumps, had an infection in it, you could touch it with one hand and then test the other hand, and you would go weak. Well, we can then find out if there's some type of nutrition that would help that. And I have made what we call Opti-Environmental Detox. This has like 30 different things in it, whether it's phthalates or bisphenol A or other toxins that could be out there, plastics, that we give this under the tongue. It helps the body to say, oh my gosh, I have a problem with plastic, and it starts passing out through the urine and the feces and the breath. So we have developed homeopathic formulas, quite a few of them, to help get rid of the major heavy metals. So this one's got OptiMetals Detox. In there we have different levels of lead, mercury, etc. And you say, oh my gosh, you're going to give me lead or mercury? No, I'm going to give you diluted forms of it, way down diluted forms. Because homeopathy works by giving like kinds of a problem in diluted format so the body recognizes it. Dr. Goodhart always said you can't fix a problem if you can't find it. And the body gets so confused sometimes with all the things we throw at it that you have to wake it up to knowing what's going on there. So if this makes you weak, then we put a drop on your tongue and that makes you strong, we know that you had metals in there. And that we have made this is called a homochord, to where the body will pick up the exact one it needs. And then we use a lot of laser therapy. We laser the brain on the areas that show up. We determine that by muscle testing. And now I've become really weird. I can actually see the disturbance with my own eyes. That just came along, and I teach people to try to recognize that as well. And then we laser that area to reset the circuitry. Then boom, it'll show up another weakness, either environmental weakness or another metal weakness, etc. So we have a whole system of evaluating by muscle testing. Now another thing I use is EAV, electroacupuncture by Vol, that I mentioned a minute ago. I have a $30,000 toy, call it ASA, and the ASA checks for allergies and sensitivities in the body by putting a cuff on you, and then by putting the cuff on you, everything that happens in the universe has a code. It has a numeric code, and they can program in this machine, that's why it costs so much, everything, whether it's a virus, a bacteria, or a specific bacteria. Is it pneumococcus? Is it staphylococcus? What is it? And we have thousands of possibilities in there, and this machine reads off your skin, off your acupuncture system coming down the wrist here, it reads what specific areas you have in trouble. Then the same machine can make an antidote for what we found was wrong, and then we laser that information in the body, or we can imprint it into the bottle, and people can take drops under the tongue or even distilled water. Now I know we're throwing a lot of things at these people out here, and if you just think I'm crazy, let me confirm your thoughts. I've been asked, does anybody in your family suffer from insanity? I say, no, I'll enjoy it very much. So I am crazy. With the type of help that I had when I was very young, this is not an occupation, it's an obsession. And so I study day and night, even after being in practice for 44 years, and why I look at everything that can happen and find a natural solution. I'm not against drugs, I'm not against surgery, but I think it should be the last-ditch effort, not the first frontline information. We need to ask the body, what's wrong with you? If you know how to ask the question, it'll tell you what's wrong with it, or where there's toxicities, whether it's blood, hair, toxic urine. What do you mean by toxic urine challenge? You can take a sample, and you can test it for heavy metals. And most people don't show very many heavy metals in the urine. Then you can give them a substance, a natural chelator that pulls the heavy metals out of the cells and retest it, it's loaded usually with lead and mercury. Now the heaviest heavy metals by atomic weight come out first when you detoxify them. So what does this mean? Let me give an example. A lady went into one of the practitioners I know very well. He's actually going to be teaching for us. We have a big seminar in January in Phoenix, and he's taught for me the last 3 years, and coming back this year, he teaches blood interpretation, hair analysis, incredible. And this patient came to him after having a diagnosis of cancer. Her cancer readings were off the chart. And she said, is there anything you can do for me? He said, I'm a chiropractor. I do not treat cancer. But is there something I can do for you? Could I find out if you have any heavy metals or toxicities in the body? Could we treat you to get rid of that? Yes, we can do that. And if something else goes away by spontaneous remission, that's not our fault. We're just improving function. And that's the way I work. That's the way he works. So he tested her, and she was not dumping any metals out in her urine. Gave her DMSA, which now the government has taken off the market almost completely. But DMSA then dumped large amounts of lead and mercury. So he put her on the DMSA and other nutrients that help the body to get rid of the heavy metals, and he just tested her. Within 2 weeks' time, she had dropped down to half of the heavy metals she had before. Within a few months' time, not only did the metals show up as dissipating, but the cancer numbers automatically went down too. So it's not our fault. Was it coincidental? Maybe it was magic. I don't know. But we've repeated that over and over by detoxifying people, having bad numbers go down. But just to say it again, I do not treat the C word. I don't treat things like that. In fact, I don't treat any disease. I treat function. If there's malfunction, if there's dysfunction, we do everything structurally, nutritionally, emotionally, as we mentioned, homeopathically, craniosacrally, detoxification-wise, to pull out the bad stuff and put in the really good nutrients. And if somebody overcomes a disease, it's not my fault.
Tell me about homeopathy for a second. So why is homeopathy such a great tool for children with autism, for one? And why does it work? Why does it work so well?
Okay, let me give you a couple of ideas in case they don't know what's going on. Homeopathy is like looking at a symptom. They actually have what's called a repertoire. Let's say somebody has they cry. They just tear all the time and they don't know why. Well, you think, well, what in nature makes you tear? You think, well, onions. Okay, so you could take onion, make the juice of it. You could dilute it down. If you diluted the onion juice down 100 times, that's called 100x. What if you do it 1,000 times? It's called 1,000x, right? Or 20x or 6x is how many times you dilute it down. You would find out which dilution worked best for that patient. You can do it with electrodiagnosis, like I talked about, or ASA, or we can do it with muscle testing. So let's say that they're tearing, they just touch right here. If they touch right there on a tear and they go weak, the body says, I have a problem with tearing. That may sound strange to scientists, but that's the way it works. Can't take it away. It really works that way. So if I can find where they went weak on touching a tear, and I can find the right homeopathic strength, let's say it was 100x that made them strong, I could give them 100 times dilution of onion juice, and the tearing clears up almost all the time. It's amazing. Or I could also do the same thing. Let's say somebody comes in and they have a rash, and a lot of autistic people have rashes because they have heavy metals, because they have phthalates, bisphenol A. A lot of autistic people don't have the ability to get rid of toxins like other people, and that's one of the problems. Why is autism becoming so much worse? It's because there's so much more toxin out there than there's ever been before. And when I was growing up, as old as I am, I'm 68 now, we were supposed to have like 14 inoculations in our whole life. Depending on the chart you look at now, some of these kids are recommended to have up to 96 and 100 different inoculations at a very young age. That's part of the problem. So let me go back here. I didn't lose my train of thought here. Let's say they came and they have eczema on the arm. If I touch there or have them touch the arm and I touch a muscle that was previously strong but they go weak, that says the body knows there's a problem there. But what if we touch there and they have eczema and they don't go weak? That means the body doesn't even know it has a problem. No wonder it can't deal with it. So we have ways of making them aware that that's a toxin, and that's where we use the homeopathics. So if I put the homeopathics next to them and now they go weak, I think, oh boy. So that's the issue. I give them the homeopathic drops under the tongue, and many times then that eczema or rash will go away. A lot of eczema is caused from kidneys being overloaded with toxins and can't get rid of them. It's caused by heavy metals, arsenic, mercury, that type of thing. Now another thing that we do here, so I don't lose train of thought, to tell you this is so powerful for autistic people. or brain injury to people as well, or just average folk. I use a lot of electrical type instruments. The one that I use the most is called the laser, and I use infrared laser, red laser, violet laser, and that's a whole, I teach doctors how to do that. I'm the first one that brought laser en masse to the chiropractic profession many years ago. But we use a machine called the beamer, and the beamer is a pulsed electromagnetic force field unit, and what it drives is there's what's called the sine wave. Most of you know what a sine wave is, but the sine wave is like a lazy S that's coming up, and this comes up, though, the wave they put in this beamer is amazing. It goes up, 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 up. It rifles up 40 times before it hits the top. And by doing that, I have people lay on the pad with that beamer wave in there, and that increases the blood supply, the micronutrient, not the big blood supply, but micro blood supply, and it carries nutrients into every cell and oxygen to every cell, and then hauls the toxins off. This has been a miracle for us. When they first told me about it, I said, look, I have a big PEMF, cost me $23,000, but it drives a square wave. So it does a popping sound, and it contracts the muscles most strong. I say, hey, take a look at this. You say you're open to everything, take a look at it. I said, okay, but I have $300,000 worth of equipment, literally, that I use for people. And I have a hyperbaric chamber, you name it, I have it. Body lights, body contouring, EAV, as I mentioned, a lot of dollars tied up in this. But I used the beamer the first time, and I couldn't believe it. As I said, I'm 68, I live in Colorado, I exercise every day. When the weather's good, I ride up and down hills. And there's a technique called aftershock, where you push your body to the point it can't go anymore, and you push a little bit more for a few seconds. You do that 3 times. Well, I ride out of my house here, and there's 5 hills going and coming back. So by the time I've done that the first 3 times, I'm shot, getting up the last hill. Embarrassing, I was having to walk my bike up the last 5th hill. I said, this isn't good. Here I talk about fitness, and I'm just so winded from doing this heavy duty, I can't get up the 5th hill. I got on the beamer the first time. Not only did I now get off and walk my bike uphill, I was changing gears to higher hills going uphill. Now I've cut my time down, my ride time. I do a big long ride around Colorado here. I've cut my time down in half. It's amazing when you can give the body the right set of information to overcome the weaknesses. And this was driving microcirculation in every cell of my body. And don't forget, I already had the other equipment I used all the time, including hyperbaric chamber. I didn't get that kind of effect until I switched to the beamer. So, again, you can call my office. We're happy to tell you how you can get hooked up with all this different thing. And we have doctors around the world that I train. You can just type you can go to brimhall.com, BRIMHAL.com. Type in your zip code, and when you can find a doctor locator there in our website. You type in your website or your code. I'm stuttering here a little bit, and the area code will pop up the doctor nearest in your area. Unfortunately, we haven't trained enough people that still lying out on the road at 68 instead of staying home and relaxing. I don't think I'm going to get to retire. Maybe retire, but not retire.
Very nice, very nice. So let's talk about autism and the gut. We know that there's big issues here, and this happens with other people as well that maybe not have autism, but have these severe gut pathologies and with allergies. Tell us about what you think is happening there.
It's amazing. You saw me. I caught myself shaking my head when you said that, just from the tragedies that we see out there. When I went to school back in the olden days, in the 60s and early 70s, the gut was the thing that moved food in and out, right? The small intestine was for absorption, and the large intestine was to get rid of what you didn't want. Now, there's full-time studies on this. The gut is one of the most important organs in the body for health and wellness. Now, your liver has 500 functions, but your liver and your gut are inseparably connected because the liver has over 500 functions that helps the gut to work better. But if the gut malfunction at any level, then you malfunction. 80 to 90%, depending on which authority you're reading, of the immune system is in the gut. Well, how does that work? Well, because the gut literally is the immune system. In fact, they call the gut the second brain. The gut actually produces, and that may sound like a gross term to your gut, but we refer to the small intestine and the large intestine as a whole as the gut. And the small intestine is mainly the absorption, digestion, and utilization into the body, and the large intestine has to do with water balance, mineral balance, but also eliminates the toxins from the body. But because, in my opinion, we have given so many inoculations, we have destroyed our own immune system. Now, the gut has so many parts of it inside that is the immune system. But the brain has an immune system. When I went to school, they said the part of the brain, neuroglia, the nerve glue, was just the glue to help hold all the nerves together. We now know that's the Peyer's patches of the brain. In other words, what's in your gut and in other parts of your body, that's the immune system, the brain has an immune system as well. And this immune system is so upregulated from all the inoculations we've had, number one. Number two, you can't go anywhere around Colorado, Arizona, and that's where I spend most of my time in the summertime. You don't see somebody walking by with Roundup just spraying it on the ground like it has no consequence. The stuff in there is poison. It's poison getting in the water, and it's poison when they spray it and they breathe into this stuff. I see people that have the greenest yards, the sickest people on the planet. You cannot do that to yourself. So we're spraying our crops, we're spraying our own house and flowers, we're spraying our yard, and by a house I mean all the disinfectants that we use in our house. All these are toxins. We inhale them through the nostril, we inhale them through our mouth, they get on our skin, and anything goes on your skin is absorbed in the body. We have all kinds of things that people put on their skin too that isn't natural, whole, organic, and when you apply that to your skin, you're drawing toxins into the body. So again, air, water, food, all the food we eat now is GMO, which means genetically modified. Let me ask you a question. Why can you take one of these cherries that's bright red and put it outside and even the birds won't eat it? You can put it out there, it won't even degenerate. One of the doctors that does my work, we call them Brimhall doctors, actually got a hamburger from one of the short order joints, and he didn't eat it, he just left it wrapped up. And then he just showed his clients, his patients, a week later, a month later, he's had this 3 different years, that hamburger has never rotted. When he opens it up, that hamburger still looks like hamburger, which was never hamburger to start with all the garbage in it. It doesn't degenerate. It should degenerate. Anything that's good for you has to break down in nature, because guess what you are? You're nature. You put food in your mouth and immediately the buccal membrane start to send a signal whether it's good or bad. They tag it. It goes down into the stomach where the hydrochloric acid is supposed to get real acid and break down the food. And then the hydrochloric acid is supposed to cessate when you go in the small intestine. And now you have bicarbonates there where it becomes alkaline. And then from there it goes in the large intestine, becomes slightly acid again. That's why you take acidophilus. Well, here's the story. There was a medical doctor I worked with in Arizona. There's homeopaths there that are medical doctors and dentists and osteopaths, and they literally have a dual licensure where they can be practiced as a medical doctor or a homeopathic doctor. So we did a lot of work referring patients back and forth with them. And one of them had a machine called the Heidelberg capsule. And they would have a person swallow this capsule, and when they swallow it, they could tell the pH in the mouth, which should be at least 7. When it goes to the stomach, it should be down around 3. Then when it goes to the small intestine, it should be going back up towards 7-ish again, going to alkaline. And then when it goes back to the small intestine, slightly acidic again. Well, guess what? We found people's mouth was acid, like 5. We found their stomach was alkaline because they've been taking antacids. So now, instead of digesting the food, you have made rot gut. Okay, sorry for the term, but you're literally rotting things in your body. So then you take more antacids to neutralize the acid you cause by incomplete digestion, which makes your stomach more alkaline, therefore never digest the proteins. And although the proteins are the building blocks of the body, if you have protein that doesn't break down, that becomes the poison to the body. So let me come back to your original question. What about the gut? Well, you can see it's a digestive problem. It's a toxic accumulation problem. It's incomplete digestion. It's people taking antibiotics. And you say, well, I haven't taken an antibiotic in 10 years. Well, I haven't taken one in 40 years. But nevertheless, if you eat animals that are not raised organically, half of all the antibiotics they're using on a day-to-day basis are in our animal husbandry. So when you're eating the beef, the chicken, the pork, you are taking antibiotics in your body which kill all of your natural bacteria. It's amazing. So you kill the natural bacteria, then you tell your body, why don't you break down this food so I can utilize it? Oh, by the way, it's GMO food, genetically modified, so it doesn't break down. And you say, what's the problem? I'm asking you, what the heck isn't the problem the way we're doing things today? There's a scripture says in the last days there'll be the evil hearts of conspiring men will mess with our food and make us sick. And I'm telling you, it's criminal what's happening. The amount of inoculations we have, the genetically modified food, which the body does not know how to digest. There's a wonderful MD by the name of Sherry Rogers who's written multiple books on allergies. And she says, Detox or Die, that's the name of one of her books. And she says she thinks we're going to develop new diseases that we're going to have to name because of the genetically modified foods. So incomplete digestion, poisons from the air, water, and food, genetically modified, toxins in the food, toxins in the air. What are we going to do about all this? That's why I develop all this nutrition. Like if I find a female hormone problem, we use female plus B. If it's a male problem, it's male plus T for testosterone. And what about all the genetic SNPs? They're now telling us autistic children are especially high in these genetic SNPs. Now, if you look at the way the genes are made up, they're made up of an alphabet like ABC or that type of thing. And if it's a mutation, the B and the A can change places. You can never balance that out. But some people genetically have a single alphabet out of place, or it doesn't work properly, and therefore they don't detoxify right. They can't get rid of things. They can't digest their food. And most of them, almost all autistic children, have a methylation problem. If you know what that means, let me simplify it here. Doctors, excuse me, but lay people need to know a little bit how simple this is. The number one thing we do on a day-to-day basis is taking oxygen. I mean, if we don't take in oxygen, we die. We go without food for several days and water for quite a while, but try holding your breath for about 10 minutes. You're done. You can't do it. So the oxygen has to reach every cell, every day, all day long. That's where the beamer is so powerful. It puts oxygen in the micronutrient and oxygen and micronutrients in those little bitty capillaries that are smaller than a hair that we can't get otherwise. The next thing we do is methylation. So if the most important thing is oxygen, utilize it and get rid of the waste product, the second thing is methylation because it aids in detoxification, in utilization of the foods and the chemicals that we have in our bodies and the detoxify and haul it out. But most of us have a genetic SNP in methylation process, and autistic people have more from the research and the literature. So the company that I work with, OHS, Optimal Health Systems, we formulate the nutrition that is not only whole food, organic whole food, non-GMO, I mean that's all the nutrients are made of, but then we put it in an enzyme bath, a plant enzyme, that pre-digests it. So many people have enzymatic deficiency, they have digestive problems. We break the product down before we encapsulate it, before we ever send it home with people. So we're using the homeopathics to detoxify them. We're evaluating where they're weak with blood, hair, muscle testing, challenges, ASA. Then we give them exactly the nutrition to reestablish where they're weak. And methyl B is an amazing product. This Optimethyl B literally is organically methylated. So there's a lot of good companies out there that go through chemical processes to pre-methylate the Bs. In other words, if you have B6 and it's not the right B6, there's higher rate of prostate cancer than not taking B6 at all. But if you have B6 broken down to pyridoxal 5-phosphate, it actually helps to prevent cancer according to the literature. Well, what if you could take that and organically methylate every one of the Bs where they're down at their smallest enzyme level, and then when you take them, they're already methylated for you, and they do the action like that. And since they're all whole food, there's no synthetic chemicals at all. That's the quest that we're on. That's the message that we're doing here. So all of you need to eat food that's only good for you. Lay off the junk food, because anytime you eat too much sugar, or if you eat synthetic sweeteners, that's even worse. It makes you where you can't digest your food. It taxes your system. It makes your toxins higher accumulation. It causes malfunction in the body. Then you need to reestablish the good nutrients that you need, and that's why we do the kind of blood tests and the kind of other testing that we do to determine exactly what body needs. And then you need to take probiotics every day. In the morning I get up and I have 4.5-year-old twins. And you say, I thought you said you're 68. I am, but my wife's only 33. So we have 4.5-year-old wonderful twins, boy, girl, and they're just incredible joy to my life. And I give them essential fatty acids. And I don't give them fish oil, I actually give them algae oil. So it's one step even before the fish get it, because there's some controversy on whether some people can handle the fish oil. So I give them that essential fatty acid every day. I give them 2 probiotics, and the one that we use from OHS is really amazing. There are different parts of the small and large intestine that require different kind of bacteria. Some are acidophilus, some are bifidus, of all different types. So we have 8 different critters in there that establish the proper ones in each level there. So you can see we've really researched out every level. So I give them their probiotics. I did some blood testing on Trig, and unfortunately they had to be born with C-section. My wife's a little bitty. She's only 5'3", and the twins quit growing. And we had to take them because Tegan was turned sideways, wouldn't let Trig down. So they got that improper bacteria. I never had, from my first marriage, I lost my first wife to cancer because of genetic mutations from the government doing atomic weapon testing where she lived, and they bathed her in radiation for 11 years. So I took her to Korea and everywhere else and found out we did stem cell therapy, and we reversed the cancer with 2 medical mistakes that I still lost her 7 years ago. So I have an obsession for studying every aspect of health and disease for all. They say that necessity, it really breeds you to study harder, and then that's right. So I've studied very hard to overcome problems in my own family and patients that didn't have the kind of help that I wanted them to have. So as I mentioned, I start them off with enzymes, probiotics, and essential fatty acids, number 1. And then I test them on the machine. Like I said, the ASA, I make homeopathic drops for them, and they get electric acupuncture, they get laser acupuncture, and I've done that since the day they were born, and we took them out of the hospital in 2 days, which is really rare for twins, particularly they were under 4 pounds, they were 4 pounds under 5 pounds, because she's so small and couldn't carry them any longer, and they're just amazing. But we do have to learn what to do if any of their genetic weaknesses, because the mother brings certain things to the table, the dad brings certain things to the table, and nobody's really born extremely healthy in this day and age because the genetic snips and the poisons and the toxins we're all accumulated with. All right, I'll take that.
So Doctor, yeah, so tell me, how do people get a hold of you? So, or you, it sounds like they're going to have to go to see your son, right? I mean, where would you recommend people go if they're in line with your line of thinking and they want to see someone that has been taught by you?
Go to brimhall.com, as I mentioned earlier, BRIMHALL.com, and there's a whole website there that gives you just a ton of information for free. Brimhall.com does that. We have an 800 number. It's 866-338-4883. I'm going to say it again, 866-338-4883. And Jason or Solitaire are the ones that usually will answer the phone, and they can answer your questions about the Beamer, about the nutrition. In fact, we have this nutrition. It's designed for doctors, but we can give you a direct link where you can order it yourself, or they can tell you how you can find one of the doctors that we have trained. Again, you go to brimhall.com, you go to the doctor locator, and you go on there, you put your zip code in there, and it will pop up the area code, or the zip code in your area of the doctor that's the closest to you. But unfortunately, you can't train millions, only thousands, so sometimes there's ways that you have to go, and our goal this year is to get a lot more people on that list so you can find them more easily. And but you can always call my office. They can help you with any number of things. Before we sign off, I want to talk just a little bit. You said that aerobotics, you were interested in that. You want me to cover that. I tell you, that is amazing stuff, and it is barely being made available. They've been doing the research on it for 25 years, and they just haven't ever really used it for the masses. They've used it in hospitals because it was designed originally as a disinfectant, because any disinfectant you use that is not organic or biodegradable, you're putting more poisons on your skin, you're in the house, and you're breathing that stuff in. It's horrible. And so they made this with certain kinds of probiotics that are in this, and when they spray it on an area or they spray it in the air, these soil probiotics, soil-derivative probiotics, literally disinfect everything. It's amazing. They found in hospitals it stops MRSA and that type of thing on the original research here. But people with allergies start getting better. People with infections start clearing up, and they're using it for a disinfectant. But all of a sudden now it becomes helping the body, because the natural bacteria is what we are. The biome of us is critical. And
where can someone find this? Is it a machine? Is it a spray?
Yes, all the above. You go to my website. We'll have that all posted for you. Yeah, you'll just go AIR Biotics, like probiotics, aerbiotics. That's pretty catchy, isn't it? And so you just go to brimhall.com. We're just barely getting involved with this. if anybody's listening to this right now, they're going to have to wait for a couple of weeks because we're just getting it set up right now. It barely was introduced to me last Friday. I mean, there was a webinar last night. We'll have that webinar available on brimhall.com. I mean, we have webinars on methylation. We have webinars on probiotic. We have webinars on all the different nutrition, on blood studies. I mean, just so many things that people can tap into for free and watch and listen. I think that'd be real advantageous to them.
Dr. Brimhall, thanks so much for coming aboard and helping us with autism, giving us some great insights.
It's been
Appreciate
a joy.
your time.
Talk to you.